In 1905, a British investigator sailed toward the Portuguese islands of São Tomé and Príncipe with a question powerful chocolate companies had avoided for years. Joseph Burt had been hired by William Cadbury to discover whether the cacao entering British factories was being harvested by workers taken from Angola and trapped in a system that was slavery in everything but name. On the islands, cacao pods hung from tree trunks like brightly colored lanterns. In Europe, the beans inside them would become something smooth, sweet, respectable, and wrapped in paper. But Burt's letters and report describe the coercion hidden behind that sweetness. That is cacao's first great contradiction. A modern chocolate bar looks harmless beside a cash register or inside a lunchbox. Yet its seed has been sacred offering, elite drink, portable money, colonial cargo, and evidence in arguments over slavery. It crossed oceans before most people could afford it, then joined the bitter bean of the Americas to plantation sugar. Machines made that combination cheap for millions, while many cacao growers remained poor. Cacao did not become powerful because it was naturally sweet. Its bitter seeds must be fermented, dried, roasted, ground, mixed, and refined. Its power came from transformation, and each transformation changed who controlled its value. Indigenous farmers turned a rainforest fruit into culture. Rulers turned it into tribute, empires into plantation wealth, and industrialists into mass craving. Today, brands sell the pleasure, while much of the risk remains with small farmers near the equator. So how did a fragile tropical seed become one of the most desired flavors on Earth? And why has its sweetness so often depended on distance between the people who eat chocolate and the people who grow cacao? The story does not begin in a European palace, an Aztec market, or a Swiss factory. It begins deeper in the tropical Americas, thousands of years before anyone had made a chocolate bar. If you like stories where ordinary food turns into empire, trade, obsession, and hidden history, subscribe to Food Empire History. Now, to understand how cacao became this powerful, we have to go back to where the story really begins. More than 5,000 years ago, in the upper Amazon region of what is now southeastern Ecuador, people of the Mayo Chinchipe culture lived among river valleys, humid forests, and an extraordinary range of useful plants. At the archaeological site of Santa Ana la Florida, researchers found cacao starch grains, traces of theobromine, and ancient cacao DNA preserved in pottery. Together, those clues provide the earliest clear evidence yet found of people using theobroma cacao, around 53 centuries ago. That discovery changed the old story. Cacao had long been associated mainly with the Maya and Mexico worlds farther north, but its deeper biological roots lie in South America. Modern genetic and archaeological research suggests that people moved cacao varieties across long distances, exchanged them, and bred them as the plant traveled. Cacao was not simply discovered once and carried unchanged. It entered a network of human selection, trade, and experimentation that stretched across tropical America. The tree resists industrial logic. It prefers warmth, moisture, and shelter beneath taller forest trees. Tiny flowers grow directly from its trunk, and small midges pollinate them. Only a fraction become thick, ridged pods holding roughly 30 to 40 seeds in slippery white pulp. That sweet, sour flesh can be more inviting than the bitter seed beneath it. That may explain one of cacao's earliest transformations. Some researchers believe ancient people first valued the pulp, perhaps fermenting it into an alcoholic drink, before the seed became the center of the story. The exact sequence remains uncertain, but the principle is clear. Chocolate flavor is not waiting fully formed inside a raw bean. Human knowledge has to release it. After harvest, the pods are opened and the wet seeds are piled together, often under leaves or inside boxes. Yeasts and bacteria consume sugars in the pulp. Heat rises, acids penetrate the seeds, kill the embryo and begin building the chemical precursors that roasting will later turn into familiar chocolate aromas. Without controlled fermentation and drying, cacao can remain harsh, flat, smoky, moldy, or unpleasant. The first great cacao technology was therefore not a factory machine. It was a managed process of decay, heat, time, and observation. As cacao moved north, it entered new landscapes and new political worlds. By the second millennium before the Common Era, people along the Pacific coast of present-day Mexico were preparing cacao beverages. Archaeologists have identified cacao residues in vessels associated with Mochaya and pre-Olmec communities. Later Maya societies developed some of the richest cacao traditions ever recorded, leaving images, inscriptions, and specialized vessels that reveal how closely the drink was tied to feasting, ceremony, diplomacy, marriage, death, and rank. This was not the solid, sugary chocolate familiar today. Roasted cacao could be ground on a stone, mixed with water, and combined with ingredients such as chile, maize, flowers, vanilla, honey, or achiote. The liquid could be poured from one vessel to another to raise a foam that was valued as part of the experience. The drink might be bitter, spicy, fragrant, thickened, or colored. Its meaning depended on the setting. Cacao could nourish, stimulate, honor a guest, seal an alliance, accompany a wedding, or travel into a tomb. The Maya word cacao appears in ancient writing, sometimes on vessels naming their contents and owner. A fine cacao vessel announced status before anyone drank. The drink joined taste to performance as specialists prepared its prized foam and connected it to abundance, fertility, blood, and divine power. Cacao's chemistry strengthened the impression. The seeds contained theobromine and some caffeine, compounds that can create mild stimulation. In a world without coffee, energy drinks, or refined candy, a dark, bitter beverage carrying fat, calories, aroma, and physiological effect would have felt distinct. It was not magical in the modern medical sense, but it could be experienced as potent, especially when consumed in ritual or elite settings. In the Mexica Empire, centered on Tenochtitlan, cacao became even more visibly political. Much of the highland capital was too cool for cacao cultivation, so beans arrived from warmer regions through trade and tribute. That geographic weakness increased their value. Rulers could demand cacao from distant subject provinces, store it, redistribute it, and display the reach of imperial power through a drink that could not easily grow near the palace. The beans also circulated as money in many Mesoamerican markets. Their usefulness came from a rare combination. They were desirable, countable, portable, divisible, and consumed over time. A basket of cacao was therefore both inventory and purchasing power. Historical accounts even describe counterfeit beans, a detail that reveals something important. People do not fake an object unless others trust its value. Access varied across region, period, and occasion, but the broad pattern is clear. The finest cacao beverages clustered around courts, merchants, ceremonies, and wealthy households. Served in the right vessel before the right witnesses, cacao became a way to consume rank itself. When Spaniards entered Tenochtitlan in the early 16th century, they encountered cacao inside an existing system of markets, tribute, ritual, and cuisine. Europeans did not discover chocolate. They entered a world that already knew how to grow, ferment, trade, prepare, price, and interpret cacao. What followed was not the invention of chocolate from nothing, but the seizure and redirection of an indigenous technology. At first, the beverage could seem unfamiliar to European palates. Its bitterness, texture, spices, and foam belonged to another culinary grammar. Yet cacao had advantages that conquerors and merchants understood immediately. It was valuable, taxable, transportable when dried, and already supported by established production zones. Colonial authorities, could attach themselves to existing tribute networks, demand labor, redirect trade, and send beans toward Atlantic ports. Then came the ingredient that altered cacao's global future: sugar. Europeans increasingly sweetened chocolate and flavored it with cinnamon, vanilla, or other familiar aromatics. The result was not simply a recipe adjustment, it joined two commodities shaped by colonial power. Cacao came from indigenous American knowledge and tropical land. Sugar increasingly came from plantations worked by enslaved Africans. The cups served in an aristocratic European room could therefore combine distant systems of dispossession in a single luxurious drink. By the late 16th century, documented shipments of cacao were crossing the Atlantic to Spain. Chocolate spread through courts, convents, pharmacies, and elite homes. Physicians debated its effects, while clergy argued over whether it broke a religious fast. Silver pots and porcelain cups turned drinking chocolate into theater. A bitter American beverage was becoming a sweet marker of European refinement. Demand encouraged colonial production from New Spain and Guatemala to Venezuela, Ecuador, Brazil, and Caribbean islands. In the Caracas region, cacao became a foundation of elite wealth. Merchants connected plantations to ports, ports to Mexican and European markets, and cacao to wider Atlantic circuits of silver and enslaved labor. Portuguese traders involved in carrying enslaved Africans also participated in cacao commerce. The bean was no longer only tribute within an American empire. It had entered the machinery of the Atlantic world. The labor systems varied, and cacao never followed one identical plantation model everywhere. Indigenous communities faced tribute, coercion, land pressure, and epidemic collapse. Enslaved Africans and their descendants became central to cacao production in parts of Venezuela, Brazil, the Caribbean, and other colonies. Free and dependent farmers also cultivated the crop. But across these differences, one economic fact repeated itself. The people controlling trade and land usually captured more of cacao's rising value than the people performing the slow work of planting, pruning, harvesting, fermenting, and drying. Cacao demanded patience. A tree took years to bear well. Pods did not ripen at the same moment, so workers returned repeatedly with knives or hooked tools, cutting fruit without damaging the flowers and young pods growing nearby. The opened beans then had to be fermented and dried carefully. Too much rain, poor timing, disease, or careless storage could destroy value after months of labor. Merchants could reject bad beans. Farmers could not recover the lost season. Because farmers needed food, tools, and cash before harvest, control over credit and transport could matter almost as much as land. Buyers advanced money and dictated terms. The beans crossed the ocean in sacks, while power traveled through contracts and debt. For centuries, however, chocolate remained expensive and laborious. The beans were roasted, shelled, and ground into an oily paste containing a large amount of cocoa butter. In a drink, that fat could rise and separate. In solid form, mixtures could be coarse, brittle, greasy, or difficult to mold. European demand had grown, yet chocolate was still constrained by texture, processing, and price. Empire had expanded the supply, but the product had not yet become truly modern. The decisive mechanical break came in the Netherlands in 1828, when the Van Houten family patented a hydraulic method for pressing much of the cocoa butter from roasted cacao mass. The press produced a dry cake that could be pulverized into cocoa powder, while the separated cocoa butter became a valuable ingredient of its own. One machine split cacao into two industrial possibilities. Powder made drinking chocolate easier to mix and standardize. Cocoa butter made smoother, solid chocolate possible. Manufacturers could remove the fat, process the solids, then add selected amounts of fat back into a controlled recipe. It was an extraordinary reversal. For thousands of years, people had worked with the whole seed. Industrial chocolate began by taking the seed apart. In 1847, the British firm Fry is commonly credited with producing the first modern moldable chocolate bar by combining cocoa powder, sugar, and additional cocoa butter. In Switzerland, Daniel Peter developed commercially successful milk chocolate during the 1870s by solving the difficult problem of combining cacao with concentrated milk. In 1879, Rodolphe Lindt introduced conching, a process of prolonged mixing and grinding that reduced roughness, changed flavor, and helped chocolate melt with a smoothness earlier consumers had never known. These inventions transformed desire. The snap of a bar, the gloss on its surface, the way it softened at body temperature, and the creamy texture of milk chocolate were not natural properties of a cacao bean. They were engineered sensations, tempering controlled cocoa butter crystals. Conching altered texture and aroma. Molds created identical portions. Foil and printed wrappers protected the product and carried a brand into the customer's hand. Factories multiplied across Europe and the United States. Steam drove grinders, presses squeezed cacao mass, and workers poured, cooled, wrapped, and stacked identical bars. Quaker firms such as Fry, Cadbury, and Rowntree promoted cocoa as a sober alternative to alcohol and built model communities for some British workers, wrapping chocolate in an image of cleanliness, family life, and moral industry. Yet the moral image on the wrapper could not guarantee the labor conditions at the beginning of the supply chain. As European and American consumption rose, cacao cultivation expanded in West and Central Africa. Portuguese growers established cacao on São Tomé and Príncipe during the 19th century. After formal abolition, plantation owners maintained a coercive contract labor system supplied largely from Angola. Workers could be recruited through force or deception, transported far from home, punished, and prevented from returning. By the early 20th century, São Tomé had become a major source of cacao for British manufacturers. Reports of slavery created a crisis for companies that publicly associated themselves with humanitarian reform. Cadbury's investigation moved slowly, partly because replacing a large supply source was commercially difficult. Joseph Burt's evidence eventually helped confirm that the labor system amounted to de facto slavery. In 1909, Cadbury and other manufacturers announced a boycott of cacao from the Portuguese islands. The boycott mattered, but it did not cleanly separate chocolate from exploitation. British firms shifted more purchasing toward the Gold Coast, now Ghana, where cacao had spread rapidly through African farming communities. The crop's introduction is commonly associated with the Ghanaian blacksmith and farmer Tete Kwashi, who brought seeds from Fernando Po in the late 19th century, although missions and other growers also experimented with cacao. What followed was not simply a European plantation project. African farmers adopted the crop, moved into forest zones, established farms, and built one of history's fastest agricultural export booms. That shift changed the social structure of cacao. Much of West African production developed through smallholders rather than giant plantations. Families supplied land, knowledge, and labor, while colonial governments taxed exports and European firms dominated buying, shipping, processing, and manufacturing. Farmers could own trees and still remain vulnerable to distant prices they did not control. The center of cultivation moved across the Atlantic, but the highest value stages remained closer to foreign factories and consumers. By the 20th century, chocolate had become portable emotion, tied to childhood, romance, holidays, soldiers, comfort, and reward. Bars appeared in vending machines and cinemas, molded into eggs, hearts, and coins. Advertising rarely showed fermentation, warehouses, or farm debt. It showed cacao without geography, labor, or bitterness. That disappearance is one of the industry's greatest achievements. A label can list cacao, sugar, milk, and emulsifiers, but it cannot show who held bargaining power. Farmers sell fermented beans, traders aggregate them. Processors separate liquor, butter, cake, and powder. Manufacturers turn those components into branded products whose retail value can far exceed what was paid at the farm. Today, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana together supply close to 3/5 of the world's cacao. Millions of rural people depend on the crop, often through small farms. Yet dependence is not the same as prosperity. Farmers face aging trees, plant disease, expensive fertilizer, unstable weather, weak infrastructure, and prices that can move violently long after planting decisions have been made. When harvests fail, consumers notice a more expensive bar. Farming families may lose most of their annual income. The modern labor problem is also documented at enormous scale. A major survey covering the 2018 to 2019 season estimated that about 1.56 million children were engaged in child labor in cacao production in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, with most of those children exposed to hazardous work such as sharp tools, heavy loads, or agricultural chemicals. Not every task performed by a child on a family farm is automatically illegal child labor, and the survey made careful distinctions. But the overall finding was unmistakable. Decades of promises had not removed dangerous child labor from the system. Poverty is not an excuse for exploitation, but it is one of its strongest engines. When adult labor is unaffordable and farm income is too low, households rely more heavily on family labor. Certification, monitoring systems, school programs, premiums, and corporate sustainability plans can help, yet none can fully solve a structure in which risk is pushed downward and value is pulled upward. A cheap bar may be inexpensive because someone else absorbed costs that never appeared on the receipt. The land carries another part of cacao's ledger. Cacao can grow beneath shade trees in diverse agroforestry systems, but production has also expanded by clearing forests and planting more exposed, simplified farms. Satellite research has linked cacao cultivation to substantial forest loss, including inside protected areas in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. Removing shade may raise output under some conditions, yet it can also reduce biodiversity, increase heat stress, and make farms more dependent on chemicals and favorable weather. Then, in 2024, the fragility became visible to the entire market. Excessive rain, black pod disease, heat, drought, aging farms, and years of underinvestment damaged West African harvests. Global cacao supplies fell short, and futures prices briefly surged above $10,000 per metric ton, more than triple levels that had once seemed normal. Chocolate companies reformulated products, reduced package sizes, raised prices, or warned investors. A crop cultivated for more than 5,000 years suddenly behaved like a luxury again. High world prices do not automatically make farmers rich. Many sell under regulated or pre-arranged systems, face rising costs, produce fewer beans, or receive higher prices only after a delay. A farmer with half a harvest can earn less even when the headline price doubles. The same market shock can enrich traders positioned correctly, squeeze manufacturers, anger consumers, and still leave a grower unable to replace diseased trees. Cacao therefore remains trapped inside its oldest paradox. It creates extraordinary value, but it is biologically delicate. It has become globally familiar, but it grows in a narrow tropical belt. It is sold as pleasure, but its production demands skill, patience, and risk. It once functioned as money, and today its price still reveals who holds power. The bean has changed form repeatedly, yet its ledger has never disappeared. There are better possibilities. Agroforestry can preserve shade, biodiversity, and resilience. Better trees, disease control, farmer organizations, traceability, and long-term purchasing agreements can improve both quality and income. More predictable earnings can reduce pressure behind child labor and forest clearing. But genuine change costs money. And the final question is, who will pay it? When you unwrap a chocolate bar, the clean snap is the result of controlled cocoa butter crystals. The smooth melt comes from grinding, conching, and precise formulation. The sweetness comes from a recipe created after cacao crossed the Atlantic and met sugar. Behind those engineered sensations stands a much older sequence: a rainforest tree, tiny midges, trunk-borne flowers, colored pods, white pulp, bitter seeds, microbial heat, drying sun, sacks, ships, presses, contracts, and hands. The bar in your hand is not the opposite of history. It is history compressed. Inside it is the knowledge of people in the upper Amazon who began transforming cacao thousands of years ago. It carries Maya vessels and Mexica markets, Spanish courts and Atlantic plantations, African farmers and European factories, moral campaigns, and unfinished promises. What looks like a simple square is the final page of a ledger written across continents. Cacao was never naturally a candy. Humans made it sacred, spendable, taxable, sweet, solid, branded, and global. That achievement produced beauty, flavor, craft, and comfort. It also produced systems skilled at hiding distance. The people who enjoy chocolate can be separated by thousands of miles from the people whose harvest determines whether chocolate exists at all. The next time a square melts on your tongue, the first sensation may still be sweetness. But beneath it is fermentation, beneath fermentation is labor, beneath labor is land, and beneath the land is a history older than most cities. Cacao's deepest power was never that it tasted like chocolate. It was that generation after generation found a new way to transform it, then built a new world around the result. If this story changed the way you see cacao, subscribe for more hidden food history.